Well, today Facebook defended secretly manipulating the news feeds of almost 700,000 of its users. Now Facebook claimed that the information will be used to improve services. For 1 week in 2012, the social media giant, along with 2 university researchers, tampered with the algorithm used to place posts in news feeds to see how it affected people's moods. Now it found the number of positive or negative words and messages users read affected what they then posted.
And results of the study were published online this month, outraging many of its users who have criticised the ethics behind the experiment. DrChristine Satchell is a digital identity analyst who has studied closely the emotional impact social media can have on people, and she joins us now from Melbourne. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, we know this was within the letter of the law, but was it ethical?
Was it ethical? Well, not really. And I must say that as a researcher, I am quite astonished, and not in a good way, that this was able to happen. But as a researcher in another capacity, it's a great way to get really close to what people are actually feeling because they're unaware that the research is taking place.
Christine, if I can just step back a little bit to an experiment like this. If this were held in a university, in a psychology class, for example, a sociological experiment, what sort of loopholes would have to be stepped through in order to make sure that that experiment was ethical by the people who were involved in it?
Well, the ethics committee at any university sets the bar very high in terms of what is and what is not allowed to be constructed as research. And as a researcher, you have to go through many, many steps and many applications to ensure that you are able to proceed in a way that will cause no harm to your subjects. Now, the very fact that the people that were in the study did not know that they were in the study would be highly problematic. And I can't really see that, especially, for example, in Australia universities, this study would actually get through any ethics committee.
What about the fact that this study that they conducted wasn't just gleaning anonymous facts and figures from their Facebook feeds, but it was actually seeing if people's moods were changing or manipulated? I mean, the fact that this is changing people's emotional states, surely that's egregious and shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Yes, I think the fact that they are setting out to deliberately change the way people feel about themselves and about the world they live in is indeed quite an insidious thing to be doing, especially when they're unaware of the fact that this is going on. So I think it is very, very unethical, but at the same time it is fascinating to see what the findings of it are, because as a researcher in a university, you only do studies when the participants are aware that they are taking part in the study, and that can, in a way, always change the way they interact with you as a researcher doing it, because they try and, even if they're unaware of it, to give you the answers perhaps that you want. So this is actually possibly getting really close to what people think and what they feel, but in a way that could never really be done in a true research context.
Dr. Satchell, what do you think Facebook would want to use this information about? Facebook did say they wanted to make sure that exposure to friends' negativity wouldn't have people leave Facebook. So there was probably a kind of sense of how do we keep people on this platform. But behind all that, the fascination, I guess, with what you've been able to glean from what came out of it, what would Facebook be able to do with that information?
Well, what they would be able to do with it is perhaps also help target specific niches of advertising to see how successful a certain campaign has and has not been. In this case, I would say it was probably really unsuccessful because it has garnered so much negative publicity, and it's one of those stories which really did seem to capture people's quite an emotional response to them doing this. And I think it's done a lot more harm than potentially it could ever do good. But I do see why they would do this, to try, and whether it's to bring in targeted niche advertising or just judge the success of the change of their own types of every time they sort of change the look and feel of it. I think there's many benefits that could be had from this type of information, and knowing how the words that are used affect people's emotions. It's sort of like the basics of semiotics.
As you say, there's been a lot of negative press about this move. Do you think that other tech giants such as Google, Apple, Microsoft will change their ways and perhaps rule out these sort of experiments to allay the fears of their users?
Oh, look, it's hard to speak for what they will and won't do, but I do think this is one of those stories that did happen to go viral very quickly and just seemed to evoke such a negative response. Although I do notice that in terms of all the tech companies, Facebook does seem to be the one that does seem to garner the most outrage from its users, and that probably is because we put so much of our personal information on there. And so even the slightest little adjustment to the look and feel of the interface does seem to, people just get really quite worked up and quite objectionable to it. So it's possible possible that other companies doing something similar wouldn't get such a strong response. But I can't really speak for what they would or wouldn't do, but I can imagine this hasn't set a good precedent for companies thinking about doing this.
Following on from that, Dr. Satchell, people can voluntarily leave Facebook. You know, you sign an agreement that, yes, your data can be used. It's a public space, but that emotional attachment people have to the platform, given that they've voluntarily signed on to be on there, what is it about Facebook? People feel this kind of personal, nearly offence if privacy settings are changed, if things change around, because essentially you can just opt out.
Oh, isn't that absolutely true? And people do love to hate Facebook while they're avidly using it. And they actually love to use Facebook to hate Facebook and to say how much they dislike Facebook in a Facebook post. And I always think the irony of those like privacy objection, which are totally not true, those privacy objection posts that get shared around and sort of go viral by anti-Facebook people. And I think, you know what, it has become such a part of our lives, our everyday lives. And I do understand why people do get quite worked up about it. But at the same time, I think they fail to really appreciate what is offered is a great free platform for sharing and keeping your content, for staying in contact with people and a sense of intimacy with your friends that are perhaps overseas that you wouldn't get otherwise. I think it's very easy to, jump on the anti-Facebook bandwagon, but nevertheless, I think it's also worthwhile looking at when you do join up and do start digitising your everyday self and putting in an online context, it's only fair to understand that perhaps that does come with some caveats and to look at maybe the fine print when you sign up.
And just briefly, in your view, what does Facebook have to do now in order to, stop a panic from its 1 billion plus users over this issue?
Oh, really? Probably they don't need to do that much except just go on being Facebook, because in reality what will happen is people will complain on Facebook about what's happened, and I would say that very little would actually, very little outcomes would actually occur, except for maybe some new Facebook groups might spring up objecting to this latest behaviour on their part. But I would suggest that it would be useful not to keep kind of treating their customers as human guinea pigs in that way, because it hasn't been the most ethical kind of way forward. And I think if they were to, they have said that this is not something they plan on doing in the future. So hopefully that alone for them is enough. But I do understand why they have the mistrust of some users. Whether these users will switch off and sign out, I don't know. Probably not.
Okay, Dr. Christine Satchell in Melbourne, thank you very much for your insights.